actually the idea. You can see it on the right map of a multipolar city, and on the left map you can see how green, let's say, networks should be enhanced, especially in the center. That's the green, let's say, shade that you see in the center of the map. But actually, the plans that are mainly dealing with transition, I would say, are more specific plans that are dedicated to some theme, let's say, fundamental theme for Brussels. Here you can see the logo of some of these plans, and these have been drafted in the last few years. We have Good Move that is dedicated to food, to a sustainable food. This plan is actually mainly saying that within a short amount of year, we should achieve 30% of local, let's say, vegetable available. Well, that's one thing. We have Good Move as well, which is dedicated to a sustainable mobility, to transition to a sustainable mobility. Be Circular is dedicated to have, let's say, circular economy. For example, I will talk a bit about the field of construction material. We have at the moment mainly a linear economy, I would say. And then there are other plans. I won't talk in detail of all of this, but all those are plans that have been, let's say, general policy framework for the Brussels capital region. Usually they are, I would say, inspired by European policies, of course, in each of these fields, but often that will be one of my arguments. They have difficulty to land in real change of the socio-technical regime that are taking place in Brussels at the moment. And this is the main thing that we've been investigated in the Metro Lab, is this relation. You recognize here, of course, the Scott and Gale diagram of the multi-level perspective on transition, with the idea that you have niche innovation at the bottom that should lead toward transition toward sustainability. We have the socio-technical landscape, the policies that are taking place. And actually the key element is to see how to link this lower level of small-scale action, where we have a lot of them in Brussels. I will talk of these, and actually the general policy. And the main difficulty I have to say at the moment is that they have difficulty to be connected. Many of these niche innovation that we call also in Metro Lab pioneering practice, so small-scale citizen usually driven, let's say, initiative that are more sustainable, have really difficulty, are often, for example, illegal in terms even of the way you organize this pioneering practice, have difficulty to get an impact on the long term and really to drive and to be able to drive a true transition of the socio-technical regime. I will show a few examples, but first I would let's say remind what was our background as a Metro Lab. There is a lot of discussion about what is the Brussels ecosystem at the moment. We have a tradition, you know, through the Vigneault, I would say a more very scientific and metabolic tradition of the idea of Brussels ecosystem. And within Metro Lab, we have been investigating more these governance questions or this political question that in a way, the Scott and Gale diagram express, let's say, that the transition is not so much and not only about technical solution, I would say, but it's mainly about how, let's say, you can really have a citizen and population involved, and you can really have a legal framework that is allowing for this transition. So I will show you three, let's say, different themes. I could show you more, of course, but those are three themes that we have been investigating, or in the Metro Lab or in Louis' lab. The first question relates to food and agroecology. It's related, of course, to the Good Food Plan that I was showing you before. I have to go, of course, very quick, so I will show you very few documents, but you see here a map that is made by one of my colleagues in the Metro Lab that has investigated the question of agroecology and food, let's say. The Brussels capital region is actually where you have all these orange cross, let's say, in the center. And what you see in gray is actually all the metropolitan territory of conventional agriculture around Brussels that is not part of Brussels, it is part of Flanders mainly, and that is actually purely conventional agriculture at the moment. Of course, I would say the supply chain for food is not limited to this at the moment. It goes from all over the world, so we get vegetable from Italy, from Spain, from other countries, let's say. And as I was saying, one of the questions is to get short circuits, shorter, let's say, supply chain, but also to change from this gray, let's say, conventional agriculture to this orange cross that you see, this very niche pioneering practice of agroecology, which are much more, let's say, sustainable. And at the moment, as you see, those crosses are very small scale, they are very limited. As I was saying, they have difficulty to survive often, or even if some of them are financed by European projects, for example. And here we find what I was saying before, discrepancy, I would say, between small-scale niche innovation, it's very small scale, and a food system, of course, at the moment that still rely on conventional supply chain, industrial agriculture, again, and that is not connected through this. So one of the questions is, of course, you see here at the scale, the smaller scale of Brussels, the question of vegetable garden, food local markets, social restaurant, and one of the questions is, of course, to create a whole ecosystem through this, that of this small pioneering practice that can create, let's say, a real transition of the socio-technical regime of food provision in Brussels. And it again gets us back to this question of, let's say, this multi-level perspective to how to connect and not to act only through upper level, let's say, legal framework or policy, but really to support small scale action. I show you a second, let's say, field of interest for this question of transition, which is connected in a way, but which is, as its own specificity, which is the question of biowaste that we've been studying. My colleague Andrea Bortolotti has been studying very carefully, let's say, in Brussels. You see here actually a map showing you I would say, the actual socio-technical regime of biowaste treatment. What you see, you have, let's say, as usually in a big city, the old way of dealing with bio-waste, which are actually green waste or kitchen waste, let's say. The old way of doing it was, of course, to send everything to the incinerator and to burn it. Of course, you produce some energy, but you lose a lot of let's say, the embodied energy that you have in bio-waste. You see all these small dots that are actually all the small composts, local compost. That is a very interesting dynamic, mainly brought by small, let's say, association of civil society and citizen active in their neighborhoods. And you have new ways of dealing that have emerged since 5 years that is actually a more industrial compost that we call compost Bruxelles. And there is a plan now to settle, to construct a large biomethanization facility that would be able to redirect the flow of treatment of biowaste from burning them in this incinerator to this biomethanization. And here again, the whole question of transition is how to create an ecosystem that really take into consideration all of these dynamic, both, I would say, the small scale of the neighborhood compost. That is very important because this is there that you build citizen, I would say, engagement and a true understanding of what is, I would say, what means biowaste for the region, and at the same time more industrial facilities like we have as the biomethanization plan. One of the small-scale initiatives that we have been involved in is a project that is called Opération Phosphore. It's an applied research where the idea is to try to jump or to structure the small-scale neighborhood compost into a more meaningful, I would say, in terms of flow, let's say, action for Brussels. And this has been done with the Center for Ecology, of Urban Ecology of Brussels. So, of course, as a university, we are just a small partner, and the idea is mainly to work with all the key stakeholders of these compost, let's say. It includes also, for example, restaurants that directly treat their own biowaste and so on. There is, of course, a special agency, I would say, of this. You see here 3 axonometric that are drawn by our colleague of Latitude together with us of Louis, so Andrea Bortolotti and Andrea Aragon, where you see how from the kitchen, you see here always the kitchen, you can, in the middle of this axonometric, you can interrelate with the space of biowaste. The left drawing show you the more, I would say, traditional way of dealing it. So you take your biowaste from your kitchen and you put your organic waste and you put it into a box, the set of selective, let's say, wastes, and then it's treated. It can go, for example, do the biomethanization. And on the 2 other drawing on the right, you see a more active, let's say, involvement of possible of citizens, where they just don't just throw, let's say, their trash, their bio-waste within a trash bag, but they get, for example, active through a local compost in their garden or in the public park and so on. And of course, it's there that it becomes very interesting because you can really change, I would say, the behavior of people and the understanding of what it means. I show you briefly a last, I would say, theme, which is construction material. It was actually a small research produced by many of the PhD students of EUAF within the framework of a masterclass that we organized in MetroLab a few years ago. And actually, you can see on these drawings how we have at the moment a very linear system where we are, let's say, importing raw material in Brussels for construction, cement, sand, so on, to do concrete. And we are actually rejecting as much waste, construction waste out of Brussels. And of course, this is something that can't work anymore. So all the question is to see how you can create here circularity of material and reuse or recycle part of this material within the region. And this, again, you can have policy at the regional level, I'm saying at the European level, that push you to be more circular. But we have seen that often it's not enough, and the system at the moment remain very conventional. The construction industry has really difficulty to, I would say, concrete on construction side, really to integrate practice of reusing. And this is again a question of looking at very local level, how you can establish niche practice, for example, logistic place where you can stock material before reusing them somewhere else. And at the top level, again, you see the policy framework that can frame them. But we have been studying this and within the framework of this masterclass, and it's extremely difficult to put into practice. For example, one of the questions was addressed during the dismantling of the WTC Tower in the North District that have been, let's say, one of the projects of demolition reconstruction. It is advertised at the moment as a project of circular, but we have seen that even, for example, for reusing the glass that was dismantled from this tower, that are double glass from the 70s and the 80s is extremely difficult just to find a place to stock it and to find who's going to pay all this. So the policy framework are very difficult to put into practice. And again, the question is really to see how you can at the same time, I would say, strengthen small pioneering practice, the leading toward transition, and how they can really affect the socio-technical regime in order to achieve a real transition. I would say, to conclude, that at the moment we have actually very interesting in Brussels, a lot of niche practice, pioneering practice that we have leading toward transition, often funded by the regional government, or for example through the ERDF project, so the funding from Europe. But it doesn't mean that necessarily these small practice have the power to be consolidated, and often they are just small-scale niche that are difficult to empower to larger scale and to really affect a socio-technical regime that remain often conventional, because it takes really a lot of time to change this. So that will be my main argument, I would say, concerning Brussels. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Geoffrey. That was a very interesting case. And as for the session, I think that it will be better to leave all the questions at the end of the three presentations, so we can see the three case studies one after the other, if for you is all right. So we'll sum up all the questions for the discussion. So I will ask now to Tobias Schaffer to present the case of Berlin. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ah, perfect.
Yes, we hear you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much for having me to talk about the city of Berlin. I'm an urban planner, as said before, and I'm working at the Department for Urban Development and Housing in Berlin, and we are working on transition processes in many ways. I'm mainly working on the urban development plan on housing and the urban development plan on climate. So kind of in between, how do we get enough housing for our population in Berlin? And on the other side, how can we adapt to climate change? I want to start first with a short introduction about Berlin. As you all probably know, Berlin was divided into basically two cities for a long time. And just since the 1990s, which is now 30 years ago already, Berlin is one city again. So we had to adapt to a lot of transition in the last 30 years. We had two different totally planning systems on both sides of the city. And just this picture shows you areas within the city center of Berlin, how much space there was available after the wall came down, and what possibilities we had in the city to implement new use of land, to implement other uses within the city. Yeah, since then, so Berlin now has about 3.8 million actually inhabitants. For our city, we have 12 districts that play a main part in planning in the cities. So we kind of do the strategic level planning, and the whole districts do more of the zone planning on a lower level. Yeah. And since about 2010, the population in Berlin really started to grow. Also, the economic situation exploded basically. Berlin as a tourist destination is getting more and more tourists into the city. a lot of positive developments in the last 10 years that we on the other side have to adapt to. So there comes a lot of situations or problems with it. For a long time, Berlin was very cheap, and kind of the rent prices were really low, prices for land were really low, which allowed for certain alternative developments in the city, which is now changing. And what we're trying to do is to adapt to this change that we have with our urban development plans. Yeah, just to give you an impression of the German planning system, or especially of the planning system in Berlin. So what my department does is we do urban development plans and land use plans, which are both strategic plans on a level for the whole city. And then, as said, the districts play a very important role as partners, and also as they do a lot of their own planning products, and we kind of like on top of that to coordinate it on a strategic level for the city. Yeah, today I want to talk a little bit more about the urban development plans that we do in Berlin. One is the urban development plan on housing. We have an urban development plan on centers. Berlin is a multi-centered city, so we don't just like have one center in the city, but like very different centers all over the city that we want to strengthen. And we have an urban development plan on the economy. All these three that you see right here, we published just last year, so I can show you some results of that. And later on, I want to talk about the urban development plan on climate that we are in the process of finishing, or that are we working on at the moment. Yeah, about Berlin, we have a very high number internationally compared of homes that are actually rental homes. So not a lot of home owners, which comes with certain struggles then that we have, especially to look out at the rent prices for the population. And also on the other side, it gives us the chance. We have some like big companies that actually own a lot of the space and a lot of the housing in Berlin. So we have them as really close partners, which makes transitions also possible, because you have like a few partners that you can work with and yeah, make change in the city, basically. One of the main parts of the urban development plan on housing was how can we keep the housing prices or the housing affordable. One thing, of course, is construction in the city, to just have the number of housing that we need for the population that is moving to Berlin. On the other side, the city of Berlin actually is actively buying apartments through we have a number of city-owned housing companies, and they are buying apartments to rent them out to affordable prices. And we are also look at the existing rent prices. We actually have a new legislation in Berlin, which basically freezes the rent prices for the next 5 years, which is a pretty radical, or was a pretty radical step that is highly discussed at the moment in Berlin and in Germany too. So what we did, we looked at the need that we have. So how much is Berlin growing? So we need until 2030 about 200,000 new apartments, which is a pretty big size of a city for Germany actually. So we have a massive growth in the city. And also we looked at potential. Where can we find new potential for new housing, and what possibilities have we there? On the one side, we look at where can you build housing within existing structures? And on the other side, we look at where do we need to develop new neighborhoods in the city. Yeah, this is kind of the main plan that we have. The darker red dots, they show you where we want to create new neighborhoods within the city. So these are kind of like bigger development projects within the city where we need to build new infrastructure, new roads, new schools, new kindergartens, etc. And on the other side, we're also looking at where in the city is potential for making the city more dense. And I will talk about that a little bit more later. This is just an example to show you. So on the left side, we have the situation 1940, before the Second World War. And then we have the situation 1996. Berlin, of course, was destroyed to a big part. Yeah, so we have kind of a building structure you see on the right, which was built especially in the former GDR in Berlin, but also in the western part of the city too, which is, as you see here, so this is the actual area, which is really close to the inner city. You see the TV tower, which is in the center of the city. So it is kind of dense populated areas, but also there's a lot of free space, which has positive aspects to it too, but it also gives the possibility to think about what could you do? Could you like implement more housing into these structures, which is of course highly discussed and has its pros and cons, of course. So what we then did, we talked to our districts and we talked to our city-owned housing companies, and we found these 30+ areas that we want to look into for potential new housing within the city. To like go with this process, we just published a brochure last year, which talks about these, how can we develop these areas as a whole? So not just housing, but what do these areas also need, like infrastructure-wise, green space-wise, and what conditions are they in, and what condition is the housing structure in? Because a lot of the processes, especially when we talk directly to population, can be really challenging. Like you've probably heard of it, the not in my backyard situation. So a lot of and understandably, people that live in these areas, they have their concerns about new developments in these areas. And what we're trying to do is like show the positive parts of the development, and don't not talk about the negative effects that it can have, but show the positive effects. And in our experience, a lot of the projects we did seem to have a positive effect at the end, and people seem to be in general happy about it. So this kind of like shows, so the brochure is really made for a public, for the population, to show them what is possible, and this kind of shows the like dark clouds of we need more, or people are coming to Berlin, so we need more housing overall, and where do we do it? Where do we find the space? And on the other side, we have the population who's there, who like wants to keep their green spaces, wants to keep their housing how it is, how they want to have like the solution basically like it is. On the other side, people want to have affordable housing and want to be able to find apartments in Berlin. So let me show, like, unfortunately it's all in German, so I can just like give you a short translation, but I mean this shows like the reasons why we should do it. Often we can build these housings faster, more cost efficient. We don't need to tap on unused land outside of Berlin, which can stay untouched. We have social infrastructure in these areas already, and also we can develop the whole area as it is. And this graph shows a little bit what you can like achieve. So we can build apartments in these areas that are not there already. So smaller apartments for elderly people with escalators. And we can also build, like, if there's not enough schools or kindergartens, we can look for the green space. We can like arrange the car parking situation in the middle of the in one place and use the existing ones as free space. Often the green space in these kind of areas is not really nice, so you can always think about to make it more climate friendly green space within these areas. So these are all points where we try to show the positives that we could achieve with these processes happening. Yeah, so we also looked into some examples. It's like a list of, I think, 12 examples that we show where we had a positive effect through that. And this is an example where we built like one store on top of the existing housing. And also we like built playgrounds within these areas and like kept the green space basically in there. So this was just on top, so you didn't lose anything of the parking lots or nothing of the green space went away, and also the houses are more energy efficient now, yeah, which is a kind of a nice project that we did in the last years. Yeah, so with that whole situation comes now a change in climate, like we have everywhere in Europe. And on the one side, it's we see it as a chance to get actively into in our city. On the other side, of course, we have certain things that we need to adapt our cities to. Yeah, we just did a scenario on the temperature calculation, which I talk about more, a little bit more later, which is like really scary on how the temperatures will rise in Berlin, and we really need to adapt our city to be prepared to this. Yeah, the history is we did an urban development plan on climate in 2011, which was kind of the first ones, or in Germany on a strategic planning level, where the topic wasn't as it is important today. So that's already like nine years ago, and then which was like a strategic plan for the whole city. And then we did a practical approach in 2016, where we looked into certain measures that you could do in the city to adapt to climate change, which was mainly about the heat situation in the city, and also how we handle water in the city. Yeah, so we in this practical approach, we looked at what are the vulnerabilities in the city and how can we adapt to this. And also we looked at how can you adapt certain building types. So this is the building type I talked about before. So we kind of have a guide now, what kind of measures are helpful for certain building types. And what measures could you put into the zoning process to be more effective or adapted to climate change. So we just, as I said, we started the process for the urban development plan on climate now, and are in the full working process. And so unfortunately I can't show you too much about it, but like more of the question that we have compared to the older ones is how can we also have less CO2 emission from the city, where a big part, as I showed you before, is we want to have, out of several reasons, a more dense populated city, and also the more dense populated city with shorter ways helps you to have a city that actually is more CO2 friendly. So what we are trying to achieve is how can we like have this compact city that we see as necessary, but also adapt to the climate change, where you can often have like a conflict, because a compact city, of course, especially in the night, can be hotter sometimes than the more sparsely populated areas. So our goal is how can we achieve both, and how can we like have a compact city and also adapt it to climate change. And for that, I want to show you an interesting example from Zurich in Switzerland, which some of the people that we work with on our plan now worked on. So what they did is they looked at a block which was used economically at the moment, or from economy companies. And what they did is they so they made it more dense. They put housing into it, but also put like green measures into on the housing, and then they actually calculated the heat development what you would have with the adapted situation. And on the picture, you can see that actually the density isn't, or it's possible to have a more dense city and also have a more adapted city to climate change, which can work in examples. From our experience, it's often really the individual situation that you have to look at. But this is kind of the way we're going. Just to give you a short overview about the product that we will have or try to achieve is, so we're doing, as I said, we have done a climate prognosis, and we do analysis on the compact city. So how can we achieve a city of short ways that people don't need to travel too much, and hopefully, or try to travel with public transport. We look at the heat situation and what kind of measures and where exactly in the city do we have to adapt, especially to the heat, where do we find vulnerable population to heat situations, and also how can we use water with synergies to heat, like how can we keep the water in the city and at the same time protect the city against flooding or heavy rains. So we did a prognosis, which is basically 2 scenarios. The first one we call like gray scenario, which kind of illustrates what happens if we don't do anything about our city, or if we don't adapt at all. What kind of situation will we have in 2030? And the other one is our blue-green scenario. So what happens to the temperatures when we do when we actually work on the city and implement also in existing building structures measurements. And the differential card nicely shows that we can have a positive effect on climate change, and we can adapt our cities. This graph shows you the daytime, the day temperatures, and that's where we found we can be most efficient actually when we look at the temperatures in the day through the measurements we put into the calculations. We can really reach the most for the daytime. For the nighttime, it's a little bit more complicated. We found. We then will have like one which is on our basic map, which kind of presents the whole product, what topics we'll be having, which is kind of as a public map we will use to illustrate what the product is about and what the main topics will be about. We then have different spatial strategic approaches, where we will have them all like in an integrated way, but also as separate kind of spatial where we need to act most things. And we will talk there about compact city. How can we reach the compact city? How can we adapt this compact city to blue and green measurements? And also we look at green space for day and night. So we, in our calculation, we looked at all the green spaces we have in Berlin, and we have then different categories of how well adapted they are to climate change, meaning how their cooling efficiency is at the moment for the day, where you need like a lot of shade to have like spaces, and how reachable are these spaces for the population. And on the other side, in the night, you kind of have a little bit of the opposite. You want to have spaces that are kind of not too dense with trees, where you want to have like an area where a cool air can be actually produced, and where the cooling process at night starts, because for especially the sleep, it's important to have certain temperatures. So that's kind of where we try to, where we need to adapt to one, like having the day situation in mind and having the night situation in mind. Then we look at synergies between city and water. So how can we keep the water in the city, help them to, like, we have these small water ponds in the city. So how can we keep the water in the city and put them into these small ponds out of the neighborhoods, and again then use this water to make the green spaces more efficient, use the water to like create more green space that actually keeps the city cooler. And then we look into protection of the city, especially for heavy rains, which is a big topic in Berlin, as it is in a lot of cities in Europe and in the world. And also, how can we protect them against flooding? Yeah, then we will have like a guide to action, which is especially a plan where we want to influence other planning instruments, especially on more of the local area for the zone planning. Kind of a plan where what do you need to think about if you start building in a certain areas, which topics are important there, as kind of a first clue to what is important for climate or for climate change in certain areas, with the link then to the product, to like if needed dive deeper into the knowledge that we want to implement through our plan. We have also spatial focus areas where we have like topics that we can't show on a big scale for the whole city. One example is we like look at traffic probably especially, but that's all still work in process. And also then we will connect through these strategic approaches, the measurements and strategies that we have to a certain degree already through the older plans. We'll adapt them to the newest knowledge, and then adapt them to all these plans and to the analysis. Yeah, that's it so far. Thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any questions, I think we are going to discuss the different projects later. So that's for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Tobias Schaffer for his presentation and for telling us about the big changes that Berlin is facing, and about the tools and the measures that are put in place to tackle density and climate change challenges. So I will pass to the third speaker. And if Marc Montiel can please open his video.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you see my screen?
Behind you.
Not yet.
Not yet. Let me see if I'm sharing. Okay, no. Now?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so thanks. Thank you very much to invite me and to give me the opportunity to explain what the city is doing. Probably I will be talking more of a city scale, so more local projects, or what's Barcelona at this moment working on. I'll try. Do you see it correctly or now? Okay. So basically now we're dealing with our main issues here are climate emergency and ecological transition. We have like an urgent action, I think at planetary scale, so at global scale, which is climate emergency. Most of the cities of the world are dealing with this, but also we have problems related with health issues. For example, the improvement of air quality, or the improvement of acoustic quality in our public space and in our city. And most of the issues that we're dealing as a city scale or regional scale are related to flows and to metabolism, and how we have to change this to adapt to climate change and trying to mitigate also climate change. We have also an issue of energy at city scale, of waste that we've seen in the presentations of Brussels, of green and biodiversity that we also have seen in Berlin, how green can help us for reducing heating effects. And also we have problems dealing with water, more probably in the Mediterranean basin or Mediterranean region, that we'll have to deal with with it, and it will get worse with climate change. Oops, it's not going on. Let's see. Okay, now. So here I have some figures about the current situation in Barcelona and the actions that we're implementing. Later on, we will see some of these projects or detailed projects. We were very involved at the beginning of this year with a climate emergency declaration that was approved on January. So, and all these steps that we're doing related to climate is trying to achieve European goals and the global goals that we've been putting to tackle climate change. We live in a city that it doesn't have much CO2 emissions per inhabitant. We're quite compact and dense, so that makes us not a city that emits a lot of CO2. But of course, we have to bring our part to this global problem. So we have to change many things to reduce the problems that climate change can do in our city. So we're working to reduce the temperature effects on Mediterranean city like us. And all the problem that majorly we're going to have is temperature problems, much heat wave, and much less rainfall. So this is going to be complicated for us. We're working on these climate plans and the climate emergency, and those are the figures and the goals that we, as a city, we are trying to deal for the future. So as many other cities, we're trying to reduce a lot CO2 emissions, like 50% from the emissions of 1992. That's a lot effort, a huge effort, and to become a neutral city in 2050. So we are now very far away from that, and we have a lot of work to be doing and to changing the city towards that direction. One other big issue for us is greenery, and as you may know, and I hope, I guess most of you know Barcelona as a dense and compact city, and we don't have land to grow or where to grow. Increasing the greenery in the city where it's already built, it's very difficult. So we will have to be very creative and very inspirative on this issue. But that was a compromise. That was one of the first compromise that our mayor took in 2015 at the Paris Convention for the climate, and it's going to be tough. But you will see later on that we've been working on that. Another issue is to reduce water consumption. We're very concerned about water because we had water scarcity problems as a city level and metropolitan level. We had a very strong dry period in 2008. So we have to deal with the economy of water and to reduce the amount of water per inhabitant that we're consuming. We will have to fight energy poverty and trying to figure out how reduce this. And we are promoting also the engagement of citizens in climate projects at city level. It goes a little bit slow when I change the slide. I don't know why. Okay, that's some figures on the climate emergency that I already mentioned that we approved in January. So for me, the ambitious goals is that we jump to 50% reduction of CO2 emissions at city level. And for the first time, we said that we won't be able to do it alone. So we need the help of the autonomous government, of the metropolitan government, and also the state, because Barcelona has huge infrastructure like the harbor and the airport that are run by the state. And so they have to collaborate to achieve this amount of reduction. So the other thing that it was important in the declaration that we approved on January, it was the amount of euros. I hope this remains, since the COVID crisis has been struggling really hard in Barcelona and in Spain. But there was a political compromise of improving the budget for climate project related. Mainly, we talk here about changing 7 different types of model, which is urban model, mobility model, energy model, economical model, food model, that most of the seminar that we're talking about talks about these transitions, these changes. And the other one, it was like talking about adaptation, taking care of health and taking care of water as main issues for our city. In some cases, we're talking about big steps, so reducing or cutting 50% of CO2 emissions. That's a huge step. The compromise is to do it in 10 years. I don't know if we will be able to achieve it, but it's for sure a difficult task. And we have to search for high impact actions, and also with the alliance and agreements with other actors, and see how many resources we can get from state and the autonomous government, from the city hall, and also from the European Union. The other big issue that is related to most of the European cities is air quality related to health. As you may know, 2 days ago, the low emission zone of Barcelona has been bring back because we stopped it during the COVID period. And now, if you cannot enter the city with a car that has a yellow that has no label on. So we are taking out the most polluting cars of our city. We still have problems of air quality in the center of the city, in the Eixample and the area of Gracia and the center and the very core of the city. So we are above European levels, and we need to reduce about like more than 1,000 tons of oxygen nitrogen from the city. So this means we have again another jump to do, reducing cars and reducing pollutants at our city level. So we're doing this with the low emission zone that is implemented. Many other cities in Europe has low emission zones, and we will have to go farther on dealing with car and air quality. The other effect that we have from very dense traffic and a lot of traffic in our streets, and if you've been in Barcelona, it's quite a noisy city, is noise, and we have a lot of population above European levels, and also noise is related to health issues. So we have to tackle this again, and we're working right now in this moment with a noise reduction plan for the whole city. The other thing that I mentioned already is energy transition. We are a dense city, so and in a mild climate, so our consumption probably related to other climates, it's more moderate. But and we have, as I mentioned, we have very reduced CO2 emissions per inhabitant. So, but we still have to continue working on that. We have an enormous potential of growing in energy generation from renewables, mainly from the sun. And compared to German cities, for example, we are very low in our generation. So we have to fix a huge step to do on that goal, and we will see some projects on that also. We have also a new plan of waste, that it's a metropolitan plan to waste reduction and to waste collection improvement. We're very far away from the segregate collection figures that the European Union is establishing for us. You can see here that at the current situation, we're segregating only 37%, and it's stuck since 2010. We haven't changed these figures, and we will have our goal, or the goal that we're fixing since all Europe is working towards these goals, is very far away. So this means also a huge transformation and a huge transition on the way of how do we generate this waste and how we collect this waste from a municipal point of view. The other thing is water cycle. We will be dealing with the effects of climate change. So probably we will have much more dry periods, so scarcity of water, and we will have to keep our water consumption very low. if we want to deal with that. And also we will have suddenly storms that will create problems in the city and also in the rivers that we have next to the city, the Llobregat and the Besòs, that could create some problems in infrastructures and in some villages around the rivers. So that's one of the other issues. We've been approving a new city sewage master plan that deals with climate scenarios. So how do we need to implement the city or to improve the sewage system of the city to deal with climate change and the rains and how the rains are going to change. We have a very low permeable city, as you may know, and we have to change that. Also, that it's related a lot with the greenery increasing. So we are also now working with a guideline to implement permeability strategies in our city streets and in the city area. So how to deal with drainage problems and to deal with the rain problems. And also we have a big issue with the sand in our coast, in our waterfront, and we're dealing with storms. We had a huge storm last year that it was mentioned, Gloria storm, that destroyed a lot of the infrastructure along the coast. So we will have also to adapt to this new climate situation. One of the things that I think we will be working really hard is the increasing of greenery at city level, but also connecting with at metropolitan scale with natural parks that we have on the mountains behind Barcelona, the Collserola Mountains, and how do we relate with the other big green spaces of the metropolitan area of Barcelona. As I mentioned, the compromise is really, really difficult to achieve because we have to increase 1 square meter per inhabitant by 2030. That's the compromise that it's written down and signed by our mayor. And it's also a compromise that we have approved in the emergency declaration and in the climate plan. So we have to do it. And we're working in several projects of new greenery, new parks at city level. It's very difficult to do a park in a city that is almost built or almost already thought and already planned, and there's no land to grow. As you know, we have also a tradition of gaining green above infrastructures, like we did in Sants, where we covered the train tracks and create a new public promenade, or the project of La Sagrera, where we will be generating the biggest park in Barcelona by the transformation of that huge infrastructure, which is the high-speed train, and also the transformation of La Plaza de las Glorias, which it will generate also a very important park at the very center of Barcelona that we will see later on. Sorry, I forgot to mention, but it's very important. Also, we're working for many years with a superblock strategy that already you may know. And so this is like generating new public space with no cars at all, and also gaining greenery in this superblocks area. Whoops, sorry. So we were going to see this main initiative to force these transitions on what were some examples of what we're dealing on. And also one thing that the City Hall did is to use the COVID crisis to implement some of these strategies tactically, or using tactical urbanism to implement it quite big. No, so we changed some streets to create new bike lanes to increase the bus capacity. Also, some temporary tactical solutions for pedestrians that we will see, and also the increasing greenery during the COVID crisis. And we're working also with climate refugees at schools, but also at public facilities in the city that we will see in a moment. This is like the main climate refugees that we're working on at city level. So this concept is to create safe places with temperature controlled by climate solutions like in schools or in libraries or museums. So the elder people or people with health problems, when we have a heat wave, can go to those areas and being there helped by the people who is attending them. So they have temperature control at these places, and we're dealing with many of the public spaces that the city has around the city. This is a map of different facilities that already are climate refuges areas, so people can go there and they will be more temperature controlled over there. So that's what the city is working for, climate adaptation for heat wave. Also, I've mentioned already the changes related to creating more greenery also on the streets, generating safe place for schools when the kids arrive or left the school, generating more space with no cars almost, so the kids and the families are more safer, and the mobility could be more sustainable to go to school and to go out of the school, increasing the greenery and creating 10 new nodes of biodiversity. Some of the examples also are related to construction types. You mentioned in Brussels explanation the waste of construction. So we've been doing a guideline for the construction, public construction in the city, to implement materials that are with low content of CO2, and that are products that are generated proximately. So we're not looking for products that are fabricated very far away. So that's one of the other issues that we're working. That's an image of the super block strategy that the city is implementing in different parts of the city, and now it's going to implement in La Champla, in the very core of the city. And as you know already, it's generating more public space and much less cars, and also activating the activities inside these super blocks and increasing the greenery and having more activity in the super blocks. The other idea that it was mentioned in the climate transition and in the climate declaration of January, it was, okay, we need the help of the state, we need the help of the Generalitat and the help of the metropolitan government. Barcelona needs big infrastructure if we want to change the mobility model. So the trains that arrive to the city have to change, and they have to be working much better. So we need the investments that are already planified to be accelerated. And we need also changes in the airport and the harbor if we want to reduce CO2 emissions to accomplish our goals. That's some data from the new urban mobility plan, which is based mainly with super blocks and changing the mobility. Of course, increasing public transport mobility, increasing pedestrian mobility and cycling mobility, which means increasing also those facilities. Some of the works that we did during the COVID crisis was to establish this kind of map. This is a map where people can walk with sidewalks that are wider than 4 meters wide, so we can keep this social distancing more easily. That's difficult to do in a city like ours, that it's very dense and very compact. So there's a lot of people that wanted to go out when we stopped the confinement inside our houses. So that's the maps that the city was implementing, and also creating areas, closing streets temporarily to create public space that was more safe. So the cars were not allowed to cross in these streets, so giving more space to the citizens. And those are the tactical new bike lanes that they have been constructed during this crisis, that they will remain in the city. So they are already helping to tackle the issues that I've been mentioning. So reductions of traffic to increment space for pedestrians, closing some traffic lanes only for pedestrians, and also widening space for the bus, so the bus can improve its mobility and its velocity and its flows. We are also gaining space to the parking spots for terraces and for activities, so the people can stay outside of bars and on the restaurants. So this is also to help to recover the economical activity at city level. And those are some of the images of changes of the taking lanes from cars to bikes and to pedestrians. So you have some examples here that they've been implementing in Barcelona at this moment. This also will help to reduce what I mentioned and issues that we have to tackle. Like this is an image of the concentration of air quality, of oxygen, nitrogen, that we have problems in the very core of the city and in the harbor area and where the big infrastructures are. So all this project that we're doing is we have to reduce the amount of inhabitants that is affected by this bad air quality. And here you can see the 2 stations that are above European limit, but if we want to achieve some of the World Health Organization limits, we have to go farther on, much farther on. Some of the examples that Carles Llop knows pretty well, this is Mas Ravellat, so it's a place to gain this greenery. This is already opened to the public, so it's a new park. And we also have some agricultural fields inside this new 3 hectares park in Barcelona. This is at the very core of Barcelona in the neighborhood of Guinardó. And another park that is under construction right now, and probably you may know, this is La Canopy at Parc de las Glorias. We also utilized the crisis of COVID to let nature to recover in public spaces and in parks. So the city hall said, okay, we have to get advantage of this situation, and we will change the way we manage parks. So we want to gain to gain nature with this changing of maintenance of the public space, and that's a thing that we approved during the COVID crisis. So let's get advantage of what nature has been already doing for us. And we're working with that, increasing spaces for biospace and also naturalizing urban spaces to increase biodiversity at city level. That's the map where we will be implementing these areas, and the first 17 green spaces where this will be implemented to be naturalized and changing the way the city is maintaining these parks to increase more biodiversity. So the main idea is going from traditional grass to grasslands or flowered meadows, and also we are getting greenery in our 3 pits. This has also been going on, and as you may know, we've changed also the way of maintaining the 3 pits. So glyphosate is prohibited at city level, and they cannot use it for maintenance. So also this is giving more greenery. One of the important changes of model that we have to do is the energy model. So increase in renewal at public level and private buildings also. And we actually yesterday, there was an announcement of 20 million investment in rehabilitation of old buildings in a energy proposal for the whole city. This is already been working. And also bringing energy into public space. So implementing in pergolas to generate shadow in public spaces, in squares, but also generating at the same time energy at the same time. So some examples and pictures where we've been working on this in roof and in public places and in private places. We have a lot of work to do in that, and this is like examples in public places that we've been implementing these pergolas to generate energy and also shadow for the citizens, and in buildings. You can find a map where all the new installations are mapped and say what they are producing at city level. The other main issue that we have is, I already said, to make this huge jump in waste recovery for us municipal waste. So we've been working with a plastic zero strategy for the future, and we're in some neighborhoods of the city, we're going to change to door-to-door collections, which is implemented in small villages in Catalonia, but not in big cities like Barcelona. And we have the example of the old part of Sarrià that has already been working on that. And this next years, we will going to implement this in 3 more neighborhoods at city level. So it will be not containers anymore and collecting door to door at city level, that we will change. And maybe in the Champla or the more dense parts of the city, we will go to intelligent containers. So at the end, it's more like individual recognition of how much you are generating and how well you're doing your waste collection. So mainly we're working on, I think this is all I have prepared for this meeting to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Marc Montiel. And yeah, I think that we are now done with the presentation. And I think that they were really interesting and allowed us to get a glimpse on the importance and complexity of the topic of transition. Well, reflecting on the one hand on the size of the efforts that big cities are putting in place to tackle the issue, and on the other side of the many voices and interests collecting around the topic, from the niche level, as we saw, to the administrative and city level, and obviously international level. So if I think that there are some words that bring together these interventions, besides transition, obviously, I think that we can use also the word transformation, because in Bruxelles, for example, we talked about the transformation of these niche inputs into bigger policies and into good practices, for example. In the case of Berlin, we had transformation of the social and built infrastructure of the city, improving the possibilities of the inhabitants, as Thomas told us, without losing the qualities that are already embedded and in the city, but rather enhancing them. And on the case of Barcelona, we saw how this transformation involves both the built level and the administrative and management level, but is also transformation, I guess, of the mentality that needs to be comprehensive and really tackle of the level that we saw before, from the niche to the international, to tackle and support the transformation towards sustainable cities. So I think that this is a really brief overview, and now we'll open the discussion with our discussants. But before doing it, I saw that Professor Maria Chiara Tosi joined us, so I asked her if she wants to say a word and say hello to our guests.
Yes, I say hello. Yeah, I say hello, and first of all, I apologize for my very big delay, but unfortunately I was in another seminar on the regeneration of urban spaces, so I hope to be able later to see your presentation recorded.
Yeah. And so I will introduce very briefly the discussants, who are Marco Ranzato and Carles Llop. Marco Ranzato is a researcher and professor at the Department of Architecture of the University in Roma 3, and co-founder of the Latitude platform for the urban research and design. His work deals with processes of urbanization and the collaborative design in crossing social issues. Carles Llop is an architect and full professor at the Department of Town Planning and Regional Planning at the Escola Tecnica Superior d'Architettura del Valais of the Universitat Politecnica de Catalunya. He's director of DUOT and of the master's degree in urban and territorial development and the Fundación Politecnica de Catalunya. Since 2012, he's member of the scientific committee of the Institute pour la Ville and Mouvement in Paris, and co-founder of the architecture and urbanism studio Llop Pastor Architects, with which he has obtained prestigious national and international prizes. we have together with them, obviously, our hosts that are Professor Maria Chiara Tosi and the colleague Marta De Marchi, who I know has some initial issues to share. So I invite her first to open the discussion and then pass the floor to the other guests. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Michaela. Thank you to the relators for their presentations. They were very inspiring. Even though we already knew that that those three cities are good examples from since many years in terms of innovation on not only on urban agendas, but also on the vision of what the European metropolis can be, should be in the future. I have a couple of comments and a couple of very quick questions. You will see that the comments for you maybe would be quite banal, but for us that who work in the area of Venice, some things are not so obvious. I think the first thing that I really appreciate in your presentations was that you show how these three cities are having an approach that is really across the scales. I mean, you also just seeing the pictures that you show us, we saw very big scale maps, but also very, very small images and pictures at the architectural scales, or even at the scale of the street. So this is kind of obvious, but I think that today it's an approach that is the only one that makes sense, maybe. Because yeah, in the past maybe also in terms of fields of disciplines, we were used to think about separate approaches, the architects and the urbanists and the policymakers, while now we understand that the only way to change things and to put in place a transition and to get to a transformation is really the crossing of different scales. And another thing that I really appreciate, and still it's kind of banal, but is not in the case, for example, of Venice, is the collaboration between city government and the research. I think that the results that these three cities obtained, it's in part caused by this strict collaboration between who spent his life researching and investigating some issues and questions and criticalities, and those authorities that are in charge of taking decisions for the communities. So I think that these two things are so obvious, and at the same time, in a city like Venice, maybe something is not still working because these two approaches are not so on focus, let's say. My questions are basically two. The first one is I'm curious about the way in which these many projects and programs are put in place in terms of financing. So I'm wondering, well, like, to just understand how much is financing by at the national level, at the regional or local level, or even from thanks to European Community financial support, for example. So this is something that I I am very curious about. And the other aspects that I would understand better is the involvement of citizens and communities, because I can imagine that in such big cities, maybe in a way that the gap between citizen and city government can be larger than in a small town. So I really, I'm curious about, yeah, if there are some programs or activities that involve directly associations or group of citizens, or also enterprises and so on, or if it's like rather, let's say, a work managed at the governance level, and yeah, like a gift to the city and to the community. And that's it for now. Thank you.
Michela, non ti sentiamo, devi accendere il microfono.
Sorry, my microphone was off. So Lorenzo from INU wrote us that in 10 minutes time they will launch a questionnaire for the ones who need to gain the professional credits. So this is a box just for the attendees, un box solamente per i partecipanti che ci seguono e devono avere i loro crediti professionali. Rimarrà visibile per 10 minuti e se non vi serve potete chiuderlo. For the guests who are with us and don't need to gain their professional credits, are for our attendees, they can just switch off the box that will be launched in 10 minutes time. And for the attendees, we'll also invite them to have to write their questions on the question and answer box. You will find the button at the bottom of the page. So just write us there and we'll collect them. That's it. Maybe we can ask to Marco Ranzato or Carles Liop. Oh, here we go, the box. To have some comments on the presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning to all, and thanks to the speakers, thanks also to the organization, and obviously Maria Chiara to prepare this interesting meeting. I'm really impressed. We are really, I think, engaged in the green revolution, but how to do the big jump? In this sense, I will not ask questions, but I'm going to propose some reflections, in fact, based on your contributions. As we have seen in the presentations, the challenge is monumental and the objective complex. For them, it is decisive, in my opinion, to act in a simplified way, but because we must know the complexity, but we must act on a specific issues. In my opinion, the challenge of transition is a community societal challenge, and this requires to take into account the gap between institutions and citizens in our local situations. So the first strategy is strengthen awareness for that, and this is a social question. Socially, people make places, neighborhoods, cities, but places make us. For this reason, I think it's crucial to understand the urban and territorial space as an ecosystem, but people understand what does it mean ecosystem in real life, in the social practice life. When we talk about city, we understand the elongated city in its real territory area. This is not easy, the institutional agreement. We saw that we have seen in your presentation the problems by concertation between public administrations. Therefore, it is not just a transition project, but admitting transition as a corporate process, complex social, technical, political framework. I think it's important to situate the aims of our works in this sense, in these traces. What are the topics? I think the presentations of the speakers have been very, very interesting. Good move, circular economy, good food, new dynamics, economic dynamics, food agroecology, bio-waste, circularity of materials, facilities as a climate shelter refuge, 15 kilometers of hill axis, extend the superblocks strategy. So in fact, if we reflect of your proposals, we make a collective legenda to make agenda. What are the strategies? We work with the space, obviously, but above all, work on dynamics and work with people in these dynamics. What are the commitments? Now the initiative, the public initiative is decisive, but the individual and associations are the key. So we need to support them and federate them. I think in the contemporary situation, our project as architects or city managers is not only to work with the morphological sense of the spaces, but of the biological sense of communities and anthropological aims to transform that. We have seen in the preceding interventions many traces and management directions, metabolic, economic, environmental, but the aim is how to incorporate this in the socio-cultural practice. I think Maria De Marchi has talked about that, and I think it's very, very important. The key is how to understand finally and definitively to end urban sprawl and bet on to urban regeneration. We have seen that in Berlin, but in my opinion, we can start changing the concept of compact city. The compact city can be a rhetorical concept. Density must be qualified by intensity and diversity. So some attention observations, governance as means and basis of agreement. We have seen this in question in Tobias Schäfer's presentation on Berlin. The governance is absolutely important, but people understand what does it mean governance. When I mean people, I'm talking about the general people of our societies and of our cities. Another thing is be careful with graphics. I love your graphics and your ideograms, but people understand this kind of communication. Communication is very important to collective pedagogy, but and how we will contribute to ameliorate the conditions of transition, taking a very simple, clearly and pedagogical communication for all the people. I think in your presentation, you try to promote these kind of things. And I agree with the work with scenarios, progressive scenarios, evaluated scenarios, work with the scenarios, guide to action, know to the people and evaluate it periodically. There cannot be transition without community involvement and commitment. So thank you very much for your interventions, and I have not questions, but a reflection about it. Thank you very much. Grazie mille.
Thank you, Carlos. I'm not sure if Marco wants to add something, and that we'll ask to the presenters to answer all questions and the reflections.
Thank you, Jenna. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for the invitation. And also thank you for the panorama about these three transitions situations in Europe, which are, I suppose, very relevant also for the difference we can maybe get from your presentations. My intervention is about mainly 3 points. The first one is what transition are we talking about? The second is about the subject, who does make actually the transition, and the third one is about it's very related to what you propose for the panel, city before territories. About the first one, what transition are we talking about? I think this question rises easily, especially if we think about the story of this ecological shift, which was there already in the 70s, and it was inspired by several crises at the global level. So why are we talking about transition nowadays, and what's different from that time? I don't have an answer about it, but I would like just to put some elements. And the first one is that maybe we have, let's say, a sort of organization of this idea of ecological shift, that something like it's more popular, or let's say is in the discourses, not just at institutional level, this idea of ecological shift. The second is maybe the government are probably nowadays, let's say, pushed to consider this shift also in relation to the many crises that occurred over the last decades, and especially because these crises are probably more visible and they are, let's say, somehow more easy to also for the public opinion to be considered. And I was thinking about the crisis we are living nowadays related to the pandemic, and how much somehow this obliges us and the governments to think about our way of living. And then I was thinking about technology, an issue I'm very sensitive to. And I was wondering whether the technology in the 70s was ready for this ecological shift, or instead took some time for it to organize, to think, to be reconceptualized. And I think this is a major point, as much as the transition in the three cases is about money flows, so capital flows that are injected in our cities. Because, of course, one of the major elements that the three presentation rise is about the many, let's say, transformations, urban transformations that this transition, let's say, require in order to be consistent. We are talking about infilling in Berlin. We are talking about it's also infilling somehow in Barcelona in many ways, in different ways. But what we see is the landing of, the many devices, many times very costly, are supposed to land in our cities. So what transition are we talking about? Are we talking about the well-being of people? Are we talking about the many ecologies the city is, which is indeed what Carlos was writing. Is about the well-being of people, or is about parameters, indexes that have been decided by, let's say, our politicians, representative, also supported and lobbied by the industry and the market. So we have for sure an opportunity, and that this transition is actually going, and we see how many actions these cities are taking, at least that we are considering today. So the point is, again, maybe to use this opportunity in a very smart way and also sensitive way, because it is an opportunity to renew the city, but also to increase, its performances. If you want to stay in this technical, we want to consider this technical language, its performances at many levels, not just smart, not just green, but also inclusive. And so the point is also about, and this is the second I would like to touch, who does actually make the change. We see somehow three different approaches, I think, in the three cities. Carlos talk about community. Are we sure we have just one community? Are we sure shouldn't we consider the city as made by many ecologies instead of one ecology? An ecology where, of course, our human being is also included. I'm saying that because what Marta, I think, was also saying, what is the role of inhabitants, I think is somehow clear in the presentation of Geoffrey, or at least is a question that Geoffrey, in the case of Brussels, raised. Somehow is also present in the case, in the Barcelona case. Of course, when we talk about this technical urbanism, we can be, let's say, in favor or not. But in any case, is somehow very, I mean, is very local and shows changes in our spaces, living spaces. So okay, what we can then think about the studies, for example, of Elizabeth Shaw, who is a researcher in England, and since many years she's talking about behavioral changes. In other words, okay, we have this money flow landing on our cities. We have these technologies, devices, but what is the role of the citizen? In other words, are we externalizing once again the shift, or the shift somehow is also cruel, somehow requires to people some labor, some effort, some engagement, and how does behavior of citizens should change? And I'm thinking to a book I'm reading these days of Ivan Illich, who is talking about this idea of convivial model already in the 70s, and he's talking about this transition already at the time, and is consider how much this implies in our daily life, how much also we have, how we should consider that there is a difference. I mean, there is a quality we might foresee, but as an impact on our behavior, and this might be also something that is considered a sort of decreasing in our comfort. Okay, about this point, I would like, who does make the change? I would like to talk a bit about the case of Brussels. Geoffrey shown us, and this is something we insisted very much in our department when I was working with him in Louise. In the schemes for waste management, for example, people, I mean, somehow a human being is present in the schemes, because the idea was trying to retrace what this behavioral change means. Not just what kind of technology we have to think about. And in Brussels, we know there are so many projects about also water that are taking place, not just about waste and energy. Nowadays, there is a new wave about energy, and there are interesting projects we can talk about later if you want. But about water is quite advanced. And what we see is actually there is a clash between this kind of new social power networks, we might say, and the socio-technical regimes, which Geoffrey was referring to before. In other words, there are some governance structures that have to be redefined. Sometimes the movement from the bottom clash on these, let's say, stubborn institutions. And the case of Brussels, what is interesting is that there is a movement from the bottom that is asking to the governance level a shift, a mind shift. So in other words, who does make the change? The change is political in the very sense of the word. Is based on our everyday life. And another thing I want to address, if you want, considering the story of the ecologies and the communities in Brussels, this movement from the bottom is clearly, let's say, is clearly run by certain groups of people who have some political and cultural power. What happens in many neighbors where the unemployment rate is high, where the income is very low, is a different story. And so this is something to consider in order for this transition to really take place. So maybe there are different gears to consider, there are different technologies, there are different behavioral, let's say, performances, again, if you want to talk in this technocratic way to consider. The last point is about city before territories. I think Chiara, Michela, and Marta were raising this question. They have the suspect that what is going on is, so the very transition is occurring in the cities. my question is, isn't it because in the city, actually, the city is the base of our economy, is because there, the city is capable of attracting these capital flows that are, let's say, then injected in policies and also in concrete actions as we see. So is also because in cities, let's say, due to a sort of density, let's say the civil society is stronger in reclaiming a change more than in large, diffuse, inhabited territories. And then, of course, this rises again the interdependency between the city and the landscape and the surrounding landscape. In other words, this interdependency based on, let's say, again, extraction of resources in favor of the city. Thank you.
Sorry, I would ask to Marco if he can lower a bit his camera, because we see you like just half. Okay, thank you.
But that was the purpose, Marta.
Yeah, to give us some mystery. I don't know if Chiara wants to add something.
No, I prefer to listen to our guests, and then maybe I can intervene.
If you want, I can start.
Yes, please.
Okay. There's, well, first of all, thanks, many interesting comments, a long list of issues to debate and to try to talk about. One is you talk about scale. I mean, for sure, cities cannot do this without the metropolitan area, the region, or even the neighborhood cities, which in our case, sometimes it's very difficult to differentiate if it's Barcelona or it's Hospitalet or it's Badalona. I mean, from a foreign point of view, you may not notice, and you're crossing municipalities. So it's a matter of working all together and working at different scale with some basic principles ahead. I think this is this is going to be possible to achieve. I hope so. We are working also with a metropolitan area together with a metropolitan plan for the 36 municipalities, including Barcelona, and some of the issues that we've mentioned maybe at more local scale, because I focus my presentation more at city scale. Some of the issues are obviously related at metropolitan scale, and they are being considered at the metropolitan plan. So greenery, climate change, waste facilities, or making the reservation of soil for some of these facilities that will be needed in the future, they are taken into account, and we're working on that issues. So this is for sure. The other, at the moment in Barcelona, the things that I explained in my presentation mainly are financed by the local government. We will see what's going on because the COVID crisis is going to affect us pretty much at city level for several reasons. One, because a lot of the money is focused obviously in health issues and social issues now, because it's needed there. So maybe some inversions are going to be delayed, and that's going to be maybe one problem. And we have to see how the autonomous government and the state government and the European Union funds are going to be arrived to at city level or at metropolitan scale. This is not so easy to know at this moment, and there are several projects. We're working with the City Hall with several lists of projects that may be financed partially by the European funding. I think the European Union is also going forward to recovery from this crisis, the COVID crisis, but also going out from this crisis with a new Green Deal idea. So putting money in some strategic issues, no? Climate change, energy transitions, digitalization, social issues, the circular economy. So those are related issues that Europe is saying to the countries, but also to the cities. We have to look at these transformations. Obviously, this is not going to be achieved, as Carlos mentioned, if the community is not there. I mean, we need the citizens there, and some of the issues are already citizens bottom-up bring up. So the air quality issues or health issues are more really being pushing forward by citizens. This week in Barcelona, there was the creation of a platform created by lobbyists and economists for the car companies and other lobbies against, I would say, against the policy that the city hall is doing to car reduction. So we will see this fight, and there is where the community has to be, saying, okay, I'm pushing towards whatever I think it's better for health or better for social issues on this way. So the involvement of communities or at social level, I think it's critical and very, very, very important. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I go second.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marc Monteo. I really liked your input and also your presentation, and also you, Geoffrey. Thank you very much. They were very inspiring, and I also liked the comments a lot, and it showed like the challenges that we as cities in Europe, and especially as big cities in Europe have. And I just want to add some ideas that I had during your short speeches. I found it very interesting, this general topic, how can we get to change? How can we change our cities? Just speaking from the perspective of the experience I have in processes where we want to like build neighborhoods more dense. It's really interesting because in some areas you go and it just works. You kind of start there, go to the public and start projects, and it's just accepted in somehow, and then you feel like it's pretty a similar situation with similar people, but it's a totally different response when you go there. And just how you communicate, how you go on with the process, and how you like keep or get people that are living there actually in the boat, and how to convince them of different projects, of different ideas is very critical and very interesting. And I think there is not really a good solution for this. And we often make the experience that, especially when it's about certain projects that we want to go for, we have very strong interest groups that have a really high voice in the whole process, but like kind of the public interest, like needing more housing in the city, how do we implement that into the small projects, or how do we in small projects get the general that we want to have less CO2 emission, how do we get that into the concrete project, which often costs more money, is really a thing that we're thinking about. And how can we like get these ideas, and that also hands a little bit into the scale level. We need to show what the city on a general scale needs, and how can we implement these needs into the small projects, which is really can be really challenging. And I must say, Marc, I really liked how Barcelona is you talked a lot about using the COVID crisis, and I sometimes feel like the same, that the crisis kind of in a lot of questions that depends on urban development works like a multiplicator of certain problems that we have. I haven't really figured out if that's often it is the case, even if it's not like really connected. But when it comes to bike lanes, when we in Berlin, we tried to implement new bike lanes for years now, and it's such a tough task to go through the actual planning processes then, and to convince people that it's necessary. And now it just gives us a chance. We have this thing with, like, you showed pictures, pop-up bike lanes in Berlin now too, and now it just like kind of works, and trying to use this situation to make the city better is a really interesting point. Also for green spaces, where we really try to connect on the topic of climate, to say, okay, we want to have a dense city, which is also in the COVID situation now discussed to a certain degree, but at least we still want to have a dense city to a certain degree, but we need like green spaces where people can go and have some kind of relaxation from the stress they have within the city, and also like now to the COVID situation. So I found your comments really inspiring. For financing, I just want to add very quickly that municipalities in Germany are tending to have less and less money for themselves. So it's also, like Mark said, it's more of being finances from the state, federal government that actually helps to start certain projects, and that's getting more and more. Thank you.
I can maybe go on. Thanks for all the presentation indeed, and the comment of the discussant was very interesting, and seeing that we share all the same questions and problems in each city. I agree with most of the comment. We need for sure multi-scala planning, multi-level governance. We have stressed really much this. I would stress maybe that I think the answers have always to be complex answers, and need in a way to have in each case both. When I say both, I mean, for example, I was stressing in my presentation a lot small scale decentralized let's say practice or solutions, but of course I know that neighborhood campus, for example, won't solve all the problem of reusing bio waste. The same for water, the same for energy. So I think we need both centralized, let's say, state solutions and industrial facility. We need water treatment plant, we need biomethanization plant, we all need solar panel farm, but these should not overshadow small scale, again, citizen, and all of you have stressed a lot of these actions. And usually in my feeling is that we need these large industrial plants for dealing with large flows, because all our cities are large and we are dealing with large flow, but at the same time using only this technology and not involving citizen indeed create often a lot of let's say resistance. We have heard Mark and Tobias mentioning then that we face even probably more resistance in Brussels when you start to say that people can use their car anymore, they have to bike. Then you get really a lot of resistance when you start to say to people that they have to have another way trash bag and to sort more. You have often resistance, or they do it wrongly. And what we have realized in Brussels is that those small actions, I would say, citizen-driven action, pioneer practice that do not deal with large flow, so they don't answer the problem of dealing with large flow, but at least they really put citizens in, let's say, a position where they are not only user, but they are really actor, political actor of transition, and then their behavior change. And I think these can be also community leaders, because when you have a compost, a neighborhood compost in your neighborhood, and you see on Sunday afternoon people being really involved there, you start really thinking that, okay, this is a question of political engagement. It's not only a technical question of sorting my waste, let's say, and this is very important. And it means in financial terms, I think a good balance between financing, and of course it's very expensive, large industrial, let's say facility that we need, but at the same time supporting very much those small scale, let's say, neighborhood, let's say, action, whatever for biowaste, we've insisted, but for water is the same. Marco in Brussels has been really involved in decentralized water management system. And it's when you do this kind of action that citizens start to understand the importance of not wasting water, of not at your own, let's say, personal level, being actively involved, let's say, and not waiting only industrial large-scale solution to answer all of the problems that we are facing to move toward transition towards sustainability. Thank you.
I would like to say something very general, also because I didn't attend to your presentations, but I have some questions in my mind that I want to share with you. The first one is, which are the beneficiaries of the transition? Because as I saw in the very last part of Mark's presentation, and I suppose also from the discussion in the other presentations, we are still thinking at the human body as the beneficiary of the transition. But I'm wondering if the climate crisis, the climate change is asking for a radical transformation of our point of view on the city and on the territory. And I'm referring to a book, the last book of Amine Thrift. The title is Seeing Like a City, and in which they suggest to change our point of view and consider the city as the place where not only humans is present, but also animals, plants, elements, and many other things. So considering the complexity of the city from this point of view, that is a very, that is the point of view of Aldo Leopold, one of the father of the ecological, the political ecological thinking, when he in the second half of the 20th century, he wrote this book, Thinking Like a Mountain. He suggested the same approach. So consider not only human bodies, but also the other participants. So I'm wondering, is the transition we are planning, we are imagining, only dedicated, only giving an answer to the human bodies, but asking to the other participants, animals, trees, first of all, a very large and big and fundamental contribution? So is the transition, or must be in such way, the transition reoriented and embedding also these different participants, these different actors? And so also I think that this asks for a different point of view on the city, different tools, and also a different approach. So this is my first question that I know that is very large and very general, but I think that we should have this in mind, because when we think at the role of ecosystem and the role of ecosystem in a good the good functions in the city, we ask for the participation of many elements. So participation is not only among humans, but is participation among different elements. This is my first point. And the second one is that somehow when we speak about transition, ecological transition, it seems like there is a new narratives very positive, and it seems like everything will go well, and at the end of the story, everybody will be very happy. No paradoxes, no contradictions, no conflicts. I think that we start saying which are the main conflicts, the main paradoxes related to the transition, the strategies and politics of transitions. And one paradox, we are working on this with Elena Ferrari, that is a PhD student in Venice, that she is also attending the seminar. And that is the paradox among the compact city and the erosion of open spaces. Everybody is saying that we need open spaces, we need more green spaces, we need for the hydraulic balance because of heat islands, because of everything, pollutions and so on. But at the same time, we are saying at the global level that we need more compact city. So I think that this is a very important paradox, and we are not trying to deal with this, with the consequences of this paradox. But I think that there are many other paradoxes and also many conflicts that are not yet revealed. So our narratives are hidden conflicts, paradox, and so on. So these are two very broad and large reflections, but I would like to know your opinion on this. Thank you.
And Chiara, I think, can you hear me? Yeah. I think that we can add a couple of questions if for you is okay. There's one from the public that I will read out loud just for everyone to listen. It's from Valentina Bonello, who asks, who says this? Well, as underlined by the free speeches, plan, policies and steps to be taken towards transition or change are already there. Carles Liop put it very well by underlying the need to involve citizens almost in a pedagogic way in this transition. At the same time, the everyday behavior of the larger part of inhabitants relies on a commodification of services, waste collection, mobility services. In this sense, how it is possible to actually engage citizens in really work, spend part of their time taking part in this transition? And this is the question of Valentina Bonello. Then I would like to add a question myself, because I think that, well, listening to the speeches, I was reflecting to about the transition on sustainable communities. And I think that, as underlined by some of you, one of the aspects to be taken into consideration if we are talking or aiming to sustainable communities is the topic of ownership, of land ownership. And so, also inspired by the talk of Tobias that highlighted how, for example, in Berlin, big companies are owning the main majority of the built heritage of the city. And this is one of the facts. So the fact that there are little people to talk to, because these are just few owning the majority of the land. And so on the background of this, I think that there's the issue that city is a land of investment, and space itself is a revenue, both for private and public bodies, but also the occasion to build and transform the city for the better. So I was asking myself, what is, well, you know, one of these dilemmas or, you know, paradoxes that Chiara was talking about is, okay, having little people to talk with because few of them own the land, and at the same time being able to invest, have revenue, but also promote a better construction of the city and sustainable communities.
Maybe I can go first. Nobody. Yeah, thank you very much. These are very interesting questions, and I mean, I think you're Ms. Tosi. I think you're absolutely right, Ms. Tosi. I think it comes a lot from that we are used to as cities to give or trying to give a very positive picture of the future, but that's a thing that we really noticed in the last few years is that you're not being taken serious if you just do that. So that's actually what I think we really need to implement in our policies to show also the conflicts that we have, like to show also what kind of more of a dense city, what negative effects that can have, to like go into it with a more open mind, which can make it in some cases more difficult, but just to being to using or to like working together with the public, that's elementary, I think. Still, I think it's important to show the good picture, what is possible, to show what can you reach, I mean, this is the thing you talked about. That's the main thing that our work is now about. On the one side, we're trying to establish a compact city which is has less CO2 emissions from an urban development point. So that's what we can do as urban developers. But on the other side, how do we adapt the neighborhoods then also to green and blue measures to make it more adapted to climate change? And in my presentation, I showed a neighborhood where we actually, or example from Zurich, where they calculated this, they made it more dense. Also, they added living space, but also made it more adapted to climate change than it was before. So I think it's possible to find solutions that have both of the or can adapt to both of it, but it's of course hard to find, and it's not always there, and it needs to be discussed openly. To answer to the question about land ownership, I mean, it's a sword with two sides. So on the one side, we have big companies that, like, if they are not, especially more private companies, if they have a certain agenda and it's often economically driven, it's not very like eco-friendly or friendly to what we think is good for the whole city. So it can be also very difficult to have just a few big companies that have a big influence on the city. Fortunately, we have 1/6 of the apartments in Berlin is owned by city-owned companies. So we can have a big influence on these neighborhoods. And if you have partners that work with you, it's so much easier to implement change in these areas. It's absolutely true. If they are willing to do that, it's way easier, and it's an interesting, or it's an important part of our work. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello. Well, thanks for the questions and the comments. One thing that one thought is maybe it's a matter of velocity. So I think that the recent crisis has proved it. I mean, we have to slow down, but we have to slow down at every single scale from each individual. It's not going to work anymore, or we have to change. The change is probably the word. It's transition is a softened word, and maybe we use it because from a climate perspective, which I think it's like one of the big topics that we have ahead, because the planet is going to change radically if we don't do nothing in 10 years. We have 10 years to start changing, but maybe these 10 years, in the next 2, we have more science evidence that we don't even have 10 years, and then we don't have to talk anymore of transition, and maybe we have to talk about disruptive solutions. But for sure, I mean, one of the issues that was brought up in Barcelona before the COVID crisis was the enlargement of our airport. Why? I mean, there's no more room for any more tourists in our city, because There's no more room for Airbnb or hotels. Or I mean, if you place this in the city, you're going to have very strong conflicts with different parts in different neighborhoods of our city. So, but with this, I'm not saying we have to get rid of the airport, but maybe we have to change, and we cannot be always growing and growing and growing and always going faster and faster and always having more capacity to produce and more capacity to, so probably we have to change. And this, it's related to velocity. And Maria Chiara mentioned the benefits for who? Maybe it's selfish, but if you put the benefits to human and you want to accomplish that the planet doesn't change too much, at the end the benefits goes to each ecosystem again. So because you need that the planet doesn't change. So what we have, the ones that was the one species that has changed more the planet is our species. So the one who has to do the more efforts or the biggest efforts to change is our species, in benefit of all the ones we have inside the planet, considering all the other species. So, but I think it's related. I mean, each person has to consider, okay, what are my roles? What am I doing? How can I change? How can I improve? What I'm consuming or how I'm behaving that I can change. And these little changes, but each person can benefit all of us, but can benefit at the end the ecosystems that we have approached, but also planet scale. We can maybe coral reef that we don't have here in Europe, but we have in Australia or in the Caribbean. But the change has to be massive. And I think some governments have cleared this and they're putting efforts on that. And I think a lot of cities are starting to move towards this. Obviously, there's conflict everywhere because, I mean, the people who is doing business as usual and they are making tons of money with the car industry, why do I have to change? I mean, let's keep doing a lot of money, but maybe it's a matter of velocity. I mean, cars, we don't need, at the end in cities, we don't need as many cars. We don't need cars going at such velocities. I mean, why do we have cars that can run 200 kilometers per hour? Where you can run this type of cars? Legally, not anywhere, in any city or in any highway, but we're still producing cars that go really faster than they can go in any city or in any metropolitan area. So maybe we have to change velocity, not only of cars, but velocity in consumption, velocity of relations. I mean, we're doing this webinar without moving from our spaces. So we have already reduced CO2 emissions. Maybe in 1 year ago, we would do it in, I don't know, in Italy or in Spain or in Berlin or in Brussels. So everybody was getting a train or flying to there. This has changed. I don't know if these changes came to stay. I hope so. Some of the changes came to stay and starts changing our way of going on. Thank you.
I can comment as well. I agree totally with Chiara that the key, let's say, epistemological issue is not to consider ourselves as outside the city, outside the ecosystem. And this is exactly, I think, what Chiara was saying, mentioning the book of seeing like a city. But if we look, Ronzato was mentioning the political ecology of the 60s, and that's exactly what Ivan Ivelic, André Gorth were saying, that we have to consider ourselves again as one with the environment, as not as something outside it, let's say. And this is also, I come back to the question of technology, because there is always a danger in thinking that a technological device can solve the problem for us, because then we are again, it's something outside us, let's say, while let's say a an initiative of citizens, and it's not only about participation, as Chiara was saying, but it's really about being engaged with the ecosystem, being engaged with the space, with our city, allow citizens to be actor again and to be really to understand the stakes of what is going on and what kind of transition they have to be part of.
I don't know if it's possible to react. Hello? Okay.
Yeah, Marco?
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments. Actually, Michela, I got your comment, but not the question per se. If you can, I got your comment, but not the question per se. But if you can say it again.
Do you want me to repeat it?
The question,
So,
the last
well,
sentence.
actually, I was reflecting. It was a reflection rather than a question. I was reflecting on the fact that there many times there are few landowners and that can interact with the city level, and at the same time, so there's sometimes, depending on the case, they can be an obstacle to the plans that the city want to make, or else an ally to the plans for an ameliorative city. So I was posing the attention on land ownership and how this can be managed towards sustainable communities. Yeah.
Thank you. If I can react, the first one is I found interesting what Chiara said. I mean, actually, there are two different points. Who are the beneficiaries and who are the participants? It's not always the same, but they can coincide somehow. This was related to what I also was saying about who does make the change, or who does benefit from it. If you bring the participants, and you say species, nature, nature in the broader sense is what is at stake. My question is, are we really talking about nature? Because it's also related to the story of scales. It's not because we inject some trees or new species in our built-up cities that are we sure we are actually working with nature because of that? And this is very much related to the last point, the relation between cities and territories I was referring to. We know this definition of operational landscapes from Brenner and his study group. They rise very much how much there is a strong interdependencies between territories and the city. So are we sure we're not just talking about an aesthetic, a new aesthetic that is landing with this taking the policies and driving the policies of our cities, and also the images and the brand, the way that our cities are branding themselves. Because then if we look at the metabolic studies, many times they show how whatever you do in cities, this interdependence is going to stay. And so territories are very much, let's say, the resources are very much, let's say, directed towards the cities and not the other way around. So if you look at the overall balance and you want to stay on this, let's say, parametric and, let's say, parametric understanding of what is going on, then it's clearly the calculation shows that this doesn't really work. So this again talks about the paradoxes we're referring to. And my question is, what kind of values are we considering? Is because it's green, because it's performative, because it's green that is performative good, that is collectively good. And I'm not against this green transition. I'm just thinking that we should be very careful and critical. And the story of paradoxes you're referring to is very important. We should really work on them. Because in any case, this green transition is going on and we go in any case. And so raising this, and especially the story of values we are referring to, I think is crucial because it goes very much to what I was insisting on before. How many ecologies do we have to consider in our cities? Can we talk about a community? Is there a performance we can impose to everybody? Is there one behavior to consider? Is technology available to all the citizens? And so this refers also to the speeds Mark was referring to, velocities. And in this sense, I think we should very much move from the idea of us, let's say, as a object. We should consider as subjects in this transition, and let's say the devices we consider, the technologies helping us in this move, is the object, is not the subject.
May I add something? Well, in a way, it's in a continuity with what Marco just said. Yeah, because maybe, yeah, the paradigm is has to be rethought in a way. Maybe because we still have in mind the idea, which is quite archaic, that like that city is the habitat of humans, and this this abstract place that is out of the city is the space of nature and stuff like that. While now we all know that in a way the original natural habitats are very few in the world, on Earth. We are talking about just maybe some forests, some deserts, and not so much more. So maybe in continuity on what Professor Tosi told us before, maybe it's the question is if city is the habitat for many species. That's it. And then there was something else that is maybe yeah, it's a general question. It's something that I don't know if we have enough time to explore, but yeah, I was wondering again if I mean if we as inhabitants of European cities, we have still something to say to the world, in the sense that our big cities are very small, actually are small towns compared to the metropolitan cities around the globe. So I'm wondering if our approaches, our ideas and our visions for our cities can represent something in the global way of thinking the city. Or maybe we are not anymore, you know, a role model. We were for a long time, for sure. Many cities on Earth were built by Europeans with the European criteria. But now maybe we should learn from somebody else. And also in terms of scale again, of course, there are strategies and criteria that we can adapt to different scale according to the population of the, or to the extension, physical extension of the city. But maybe, I mean, our cities are so different from other, I think, about, of course, Asian, Eastern megalopolis, or Southern America, metropolitan areas. Maybe it's time to accept the fact that we are, yeah, also in comparison to the global population, we are few people. So it's more a suggestion of a discussion that maybe we can unfold the next weeks, months, I don't know. But yeah, maybe I'm wondering if this session can be useful just for us, amongst us, or maybe if we can learn and say something also to people, communities, and cities out of European territory.
Yes, I would like to add some more comments, two more comments. I think going back to pedagogical reflections, we are facing a complex problem. That's clear. But talking about ecosystem, in my opinion, this question is to assume to be one more component, not the principal subject. It is easy to proclaim it, but however, it's very hard challenge to implement it. We are, in the concept of city ecosystem implies living beings, biotic and abiotic beings. To some, we can offer a better way of life, or to assecurate this possibility of life. To others, we must take care of them. And I think that's very important. It's a complex situation. We are not the point of view of psychological, social, philosophical point of view. We are not the center. We are not anymore the center of life. And this revolution, I think it's very important to assume this change of conditions, how to see, how to analyze, so how to act. Because when we use the theory, theoros in Greek, it's a good observation. When you use theory, this theory can be very close to the reality. And in this revolution, the realities change the paradigms. To contribute to this change of paradigms, I think we need to show and to demonstrate that the concept of the city and what it entails serve to solve our particular needs, but also new and extremely real planetary needs. That's the center of these new needs of new pedagogies. People need to check what we change things, the things that we need. People need to realize that the things are changing. So for public servers, we must suggest that they must be stronger to sustain, run, and resist in these proposals that change the essentials of life. Fewer vehicles or conversion to electrics, better air quality, better health. So the servers, the public servers, they must be absolutely stronger to maintain some kind of decisions. That's the point of view of political attitude, very strong, but we need that because the pedagogy is not only the community pedagogy, but also the organization and institutional pedagogy. The other thing, on the other comment, is about proximity. We talk a lot about proximity, but now we have double proximity. The proximity that my yard, my neighborhood, my life with the others, but we have the planetary proximity. And in this sense, we need a lot of pedagogy to share with the others these new conceptions of our thinking and also our life. In this sense, for instance, when people says, oh, marvelous, this new passage that the public administration construct about the station, the railway station. So open passage, micro hubs, a lot of many things that you have demonstrated in your interventions are the keys to understand the small scale that change everything or almost everything. So in this sense, I prefer to talk about the scale, in what we can name moving between scales, sliding between scales. And for me, when I talk about the city, it's not anymore that's sure the traditional city, not also the mega regions or the names, the concepts, the traditional concept, but the territorial mosaic city. That means the fusion, the symbiotic synergies between all the components that are our support of life. So sliding between scales is that today we practice with the examples of Brussels, of Berlin, of Barcelona, demonstrating what kind of strategies, but also specific actions what we do. To be a little bit polemic, when we saw the changes in Barcelona, in the streets of Barcelona, and we call that tactical urbanism, I prefer not to talk about tactical urbanism, social urbanism, social structural urbanism, because I think it's better to act in a very small points, but to maintain a structural vision of the all territorial mosaic city. Thank you.
Is it possible to say something about Michela?
Yes, I think we have still 10 minutes.
Okay.
Before the
Yeah,
end.
sure. Yes.
I found very interesting what Carlos was saying, the first story of pedagogical reflection. I think there is a problem when we talk about we need to think the fact that we are just one of components, piece of nature. Because there we become again the subject. So it becomes, in my opinion, when we protect an area, it's us who decide to protect an area. If we decide to go for this transition, it's the human being who will decide for it. So I think there is an impossibility for nature to become the subject, unless when it overcomes. So our organizations, when it causes, let's say, disruptions in the trajectory of our life. So this is maybe philosophical, but this is something I think we need to consider. Because again, it's about, okay, are we sure we have to bring nature in the forefront? Can we really do that? I see a real risk on that, and also it might sound, in my opinion, a new rhetoric, let's say a new narrative. The second is like saying, okay, we destroyed everything, and now we take a step back. Can we really do that? I don't know. The second is about the scales you were referring to, Carles. Very interesting, the story of the sliding between cities, the story of territorial mosaic cities. I really think that this contradiction, no? Again, this duality, city and not city, is problematic. Again, referring to the story of the operational landscape. So this one, as you were referring to, the city territory is also the way to understand the story and to reconsider the interdependencies, because basically means to leave the territory, means to leave the globe, which is, I think, very interesting, an interesting perspective, also to be fair and to be awareness of what the way we live and the impact our life has.
I add some very last few words. I agree with many things that have been said. Yesterday I was in the annual conference of the political scientists, the European political scientists. They were discussing how climate change is affecting welfare policies from the social point of view. That was a big surprise for me, that political scientists are questioning themselves about how to incorporate climate change in the political, in the social policies and the welfare policies. And they mentioned two things that I think can help us in such way. The need to redefine what is well-being. And let me say what is well-being for the different species that inhabit our cities. And the second one is the concept of planetary boundaries. We are still speaking of planetary urbanization, but never of planetary boundaries. And what the social scholars are trying to discuss and to understand is that the human being today in a global world do not have a local boundary, but they act as they have a planetary boundaries. So I'm following the thinking of Carles Llop on mosaic city, symbiotic city. I think that we should also start to use this concept of planetary boundaries in order to understand our city and the relationship and the interdependencies with what is not city. I think that we have 5 minutes to conclude. I don't know if there is other.
I think nobody answered to Valentina's question.
Yes. So if Mark, Tobias and Geoffrey want to give an answer to Valentina.
Maybe Michela, it's better to rephrase it in English.
if you can't, well, actually, I think that the question is visible to all the panelists. So if you go on the chat, our guests can read it. If you want, I can read it again. Oh, there's a new one actually. To what one? To which one are you referring to, Marco? Because there was this question about by Valentina asking in how it was possible to actually engage citizens in real work, spend part of their time in taking part in this transition, if on the one hand their everyday behavior is based on the commodification of services. You can read the full answer on the chat. And then Valentina adds, are we going towards the Homo ecologicus? Is it part of the yes story on ecological transition Maria Chiara was mentioning? So if our guests have some answer to this.
Hello, sorry. One of the things that Carlos Llop mentioned, and I think it's very important, is that we are one more of those elements at planetary scale. So, and it's been like this always, but probably we've forgotten. And it's not a thing between a relation with humans and the rest. We are part of it, and And that's very important to keep it on mind. I don't know if it's the homo ecologicals or how to call it, but I think it's one of the principles. I would say that the other idea is like, I would say that citizens have been engaged always, in more or less, in larger amounts, or really engaged strongly or less strongly. But we are seeing how in cities, for example, here in Barcelona, we're doing a project. The Green Department or the Department of Parks is doing a project which is called Hands to the Green, so that people is starting to maintain their greenery, that it's close to their houses. So the involvement of, okay, I'm working with the territory that it's very close to me, or planting trees, or explaining things to other to neighbors. I think this is very, very important too. There's tradition in other cities that they've been doing this for many years, but maybe not such much in Mediterranean cities. But this is going on more and more. Maybe it's only a little thing and it's not a huge issue, but there are a lot of people that it's starting to work together with the administration, and it's not only saying, okay, the city hall or the autonomous region is going to solve this to me. And there are many ways to be engaged. The other one is participating and transforming and helping and working together. The other is like just being against things, or protesting, or demanding, or asking for a change, or for, so the politicians have to move, and then also the technical departments have to move, and everybody. So there are many ways of implication that citizens can really push forward those challenges or those conflicts that we have, and discuss them. When we were working with the emergency declaration that we approved in January, we had presential meetings with more than 200 people discussing several issues, from waste to great infrastructures, airport, harbor issues, energy consumption. So there are many groups working together and discussing. And obviously in that types of meetings, you have people who is more resistant to this type of changes, and people who saying close the airport. So in between that, there's hundreds of colors and hundreds of grays in between those radical positions, and they are there discussing together and discussing with the administration. And I guess most of us, the participants here, have been involved in several processes of participation where people is engaged or doing this type of things. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think it's really like our plannings and our ideas of we have of a city. It's getting so complex, and I really think it's key to communicate in a simple and easy way for all the population, especially when you think about people in Berlin with migration background that are not like born in this culture. It's one of the keys, and I think it's really important to remember ourselves, to work on these projects, and we dive really deep in, and also for the population to communicate it is really important. And I think in the sense of change, I think it's both ways. I think change can only come or can come from certain groups in the population, and we have to, as a community, we have to support that and bring that to the forefront. On the other side, it's our task to find common ideas and put them into whatever our possibilities are, law, or into our planning processes, if we think they are right, also against small minorities of people that we have in this city, So it's I think kind of both ways to have change through the individual in the city, but for big questions where you have a lot of when it comes to climate, you also need certain planning ideas, regulations from the cities to get them through. I believe it's not, you can't do it just by trusting the individual to go to reach the goals that we have on climate change.
Do we still have time for, I can otherwise react?
Yeah,
Indeed,
sure.
I agree totally with Valentina that indeed most of the population still want to rely on commodification of services like waste, mobility, water, and so on. And the part that we were talking about that is engaged in small pioneer practice is very small, and we can force all citizens to move to this. So for sure, we will continue to have this kind of dual system. But I think what is important is that cities really cherish this kind of citizen involved in this, and they become kind of community leaders. For example, I think cities and state a tradition of making economic leader as stars almost, you know, of growth, let's say, in a sense. And we could think that in the same way we shift, and we don't only, let's say, make stars of these economic leaders that are really driving growth of states and cities, but also people that are really engaged, not in theory, I'm not talking so much in theory, but really in being actively involved into this political ecology action, let's say, on the grounds. Although it doesn't mean, again, that everybody has to become like this. And this is why I was mentioning before, we need complex solution. We need at the same time, to give very concrete example, biomethanization industrial device for those that don't want to be involved in small scale compost. And at the same time, we need to allow to be legal, very small action like a neighborhood compost that often are still let's say, outside of the European legal framework. So this is very important to allow the coexistence of these different levels.
Thank you, Geoffrey. And if there is nobody else who wants to add something, we would close the session here. Is there someone else who wants to add something?
I only want to ask to Tobias and Mark to send their presentation to me so I can see, not to listen what you said. And already thanks Geoffrey to have sent it to me right now. And also, sorry, I want to thank everybody for being here. And let me also add that we are dealing with this topic, the transition, the project of transition with the PhD in urbanism at Venice. So probably in the next, I hope, month or next year, we will organize a new meeting. So you are all kindly invited to take part. But we will say to you. Thank you.
And thanks again very much to all our guests for the rich discussion and for the attendees as well. And yeah, so to hope to see you very soon in the next future. And bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.